My book, Youth Street Gangs, A Critical Appraisal, is an effort to engage the current literature on this very important subject in criminology and sociology. I come at the subject of youth gangs from a critical criminological and sociological perspective, in which I try to understand the gang as not simply a purveyor of violence and protagonists of crime, but youth who join together to resolve social and cultural problems in a position of relative powerlessness. I've been studying the youth street gang for more than 2 decades, originally on the West Coast in San Francisco and Los Angeles, in the last 15 years or more in New York City and the East Coast, and now in Europe and South America and Central America. And so my approach to gangs is more of a global one than simply a local one, or it sometimes is called as, referred to as glocal. Now, the problem with much of the dominant literature is that I argue it pathologizes the gang. It creates the gang as some kind of devil, a folk devil, or something that is an aggregate of violent behaviors and drugs and pure deviance. And it lends itself then to coercive social control, as we see today, for example, in stop and frisk in New York City, or many kinds of ordinances around the United States that attempt to control young people because of the attire they wear or the colour of their skin. And this has led to, in great measure, to the prison industrial complex, or at least it's enabled the prison population to expand to the extraordinary rate that it has done. I argue that against this pathologization, we need to be in touch with the original studies on gangs, which came out of the Chicago School in the 1920s, which looked at the group much more as a social group that came together to address issues of marginalization and social exclusion. Later, the gang became conceived in the 1950s, also from a humanistic standpoint, as social deviants, but the people that could cross both sides of the line, both in the mainstream and in deviant society. The whole attempt traditionally in sociology and criminology, from a humanistic perspective, was to try to understand the gang. But from the 60s and the 70s on, it's as if most criminologists already had an understanding of what the gang was or is, and they posit their idea of the gang on to the gang itself. I come at it from a very different perspective, in that to understand the gang, you must engage the gang members, you must stay with the gang members on the street or in different circumstances, in the school or at home, and see the gang holistically in all of its different contexts. Because all of the gang members, the gang membership is simply one identity. Many of them are fathers and brothers or sisters. They have multiple identities. Many of them are workers, both in the formal and the informal economy. And so we have to understand the gang in all its complexity, not simply at the level of very superficiality. And the other point which is terribly important about this book is to understand it from a global perspective. The gang isn't simply alive and well in the United States or in England, the home of industrialization. But we see it in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, and throughout South America. And so the question is the gang in these different contexts the same as the gang is in the United States? And I argue, perhaps and perhaps not, that they adapt to their social environment, to their surroundings. But they're not simply adapting, they also struggle to create new environments. And in many circumstances, they actually develop a political awareness and a political consciousness. And in certain societies, unlike our own, for example, in Ecuador or in Spain or even in Italy, the response to gangs hasn't been simply repression and eradication, but their attempt to engage street gangs from an empowerment model, to turn gangs more into social citizens than simply the other. This basically is a summary of my book. I hope you read it and enjoy it, and I look forward to any correspondence you may have to me, David Brotherton, John Jay College of Criminal Justice at the City University of New York in New York City. Thank you.